Hey folks, I'm Dennis. Thanks for watching my video. A few of my good viewers have recommended that I do some research into mower deck spindles. So I've bought a couple of new ones and I've done the research. Let me show you what I found and how you can fix it. So this may apply to your existing spindles on your mower, or you can buy replacement spindles. Some of them come with a Zerk fitting on the top in the shaft. Some of them come with a Zerk fitting on the side. If they don't have a grease fitting at all, you can actually put one in there. You can take this thing apart, drill a hole in the side of the spindle housing, tap it, and then install a Zerk fitting, or use a self-tapping Zerk fitting. But what I'm about to show you changes the way you grease these things. I'm going to take that top nut off, and then take the there's a thrust bearing or a thrust washer. You want to take that out. On this particular one, I'm going to take the Zerk fitting off first because it's on the top of the shaft. If it's on the side of the housing, I don't have to worry about it. Just take that out. Then I'm going to take a plastic faced hammer. A brass hammer is fine. A steel will be okay if you're careful. Just make sure that you put the nut back on and only strike on the nut and not on the shaft. But I'm still going to use a plastic just to be safe. Then you're going to take that and you're going to tap it out. You can see it starts coming out. Some of them will come out easier than others. Some of them will almost just fall out. And then you'll hear when it gets loose. Take that nut off and you can pull the shaft out. Now most of the time, not always, most of the time the lower bearing will come out with the shaft. It may not always. Sometimes it'll stay in here, but you can still tap it out with a brass drift or something like that, like a brass punch. You can use a screwdriver if you have to. You just got to be a little more careful. So next I want to take out the top bearing. Generally you're going to need a couple of pieces of wood or something like that to hold up the housing so that you can tap this out, because it's usually pretty flush, particularly on these spindles. This particular spindle is for most of your Poulins, your Husqvarnas, AYPs, and Craftsman tractors. So I'm going to set this up on a couple of blocks of wood with just the outer part of the housing resting on the wood. Let's set these like that so it doesn't fall over so easy. It depends on the housing as to how firm that bearing is in there. I'm just going to go around and tap out on the outer bearing race. And as you do that, you'll see that where it's starting to come out. It doesn't take a lot. There, and then it'll pop out. So now you've got both bearings are out. You've just got the housing. Like I say, now if you don't have grease fittings already on your spindles, either on the shaft or in the housing, now once you've got everything out of there would be the time to drill a hole, tap it, and put in a Zerk. That way you can grease it. And from the side's actually a little bit easier. This particular one's got the grease fitting on the top of the shaft, which is fine. The way they make these, I'm not sure if you can see it, the grease fitting goes in the top, so you pump the grease in here, and then there's a hole in the shaft that allows the grease to come out and to fill the cavity, and supposedly to grease the bearings. Now here's the problem, and here's what they don't tell you. You can buy these spindles with grease fittings and you can grease your spindles all day long. The problem is these bearings are sealed bearings on both sides, so no amount of grease that you pump into this housing is going to get into this bearing. It's still going to only be lubricated with whatever grease is in it from the factory, because these seals will prevent anything from getting in or out of that bearing. The bottom bearing is the same. This is the side that would be exposed to the grease in the cavity, and there's a seal on it. So it's not going to do any good to grease them, because the grease is never going to, the bearing's never going to see the grease. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take these seals, just fit into the bearings. They're a kind of a plastic seal with a real little thin metal strip underneath there. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take a little tiny screwdriver, or you can take a knife, take the tip of a knife, whatever you want to do, just be careful. And we're going to get in here with that, with whatever you're using, and we're just going to pull that seal out. All right, that's the seal, and you can see now this bearing's got some grease in it, so that's a little bit reassuring. They're all supposed to be greased, but you know, I'm not sure if they're using cheap Chinese bearings if they're greased or not. We've got the inside of this bearing exposed so that when grease pumps into the cavity, it'll actually go into the bearing. Now I will say this, I watched another video of a guy showing a little bit about this, and he made a good point. Once you do all this, you have to stay committed to keeping your spindles greased. If you don't, you're just going to let your bearings run dry, and you're going to have the same problem. We're going to do the same thing to the lower. You're going to pull that seal out. Keep your bearings off to the side and don't get any shavings or anything in them. This part might be a little disputable, all right? It just depends on what you want and what you believe, I suppose. Here's my thinking. If you have a grease fitting, you put this all back together and you pump this full of grease. And then after, you know, whenever you do your oil change or every other oil change or once a year, whatever you do, you pump more grease into here. At some point in time, you're going to get that full of grease, and you're probably going to get it too full of grease. If you continue to do that, it's going to just push the bearings out of the mandrel housing, out of the spindle housing. So I don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do with mine, you can make up your own mind about this. I'm going to drill a small hole in the side of my housing for a kind of a weep hole, so that when I pump this cavity full of grease and the grease comes out of this hole, I'm going to know I've got it completely full and it's time to stop pumping. And then when I put more grease into it in the future, I'm going to have an outlet for the excess grease to come out. Y'all have to wipe it off, but I don't have to worry about packing it so tight that I push my bearings out. So anyway, all you need to do that is you need a center punch. This is pretty soft metal. It's some kind of a either magnesium or aluminum alloy. I'm going to put mine roughly in the center so I can see it, and I'm going to mount this so that the weep hole is to the outside so I can see it when I'm filling it with grease. And I'm just going to center punch it. This is a 3/32 bit. You could probably even use a 1/16. You just want it to be a fairly small hole, because all you're wanting to do is to see when the cavity's full of grease. You can put a piece of like electrical tape over it. You could probably leave it exposed once you get all your grease in here, because the grease that's in the hole is not going to suck back down in there and pull dirt in it. That's probably debatable too. Yeah, I'm thinking just put a piece of tape over the weep hole to keep it protected. Just drill a hole. If you've got a drill press, it's probably better to use this with a drill press. I've got one, but since I'm trying to show people how to do it, you can also do it with a hand drill. So now we got a hole in the side of the mandrel, which is fine. Make sure that you don't have any shavings on the inside, because you don't want any shavings getting in your bearings. If you do, blow it out with compressed air, spray it out with WD-40, something like that, wipe it out. Just make sure you don't have any shavings hanging around. And then you're ready to put it back together. When you put it back together, take the bearing that you've taken the seal out of. This is a top bearing. It's smaller than the bottom bearing. Take a brass hammer, a plastic face hammer, something like that, a dead blow hammer, and tap that in. There's a ridge that stops the bearing on the bottom and the top. If you can't get this top all the way to that ridge by looking in here and seeing that it's on the ridge, you can always take a socket that's the same diameter of the, really prefer the outer, but even the inner will be okay, and finish tapping it. On this one, it's fully seated, so no big deal. I can take my brass drift if I want and you know, kind of make sure to tap it into place. But it's, I can tell from the back side that it's already seated. You can usually tell by the sound also. So then same thing with the bottom bearing. We've taken the seal off, so we want the exposed side to be toward the cavity, you know. And then put him back together. And you can tell the difference in the sound when that lower bearing gets seated. Don't forget your thrust washer. You'll use that when you put it on to go under the pulley. And of course this side is starred, that's where the pulley goes on. When you replace these, if you're replacing them, you know, make sure you check the star pattern in your pulley, that it's not stripped out. If it is, you need to replace your pulley. And if you're doing this to existing spindles, make sure you check the blade star pattern to make sure it's not sheared off or stripped. If it is, you'll need to replace the shaft. But you can do that without replacing the whole spindle. You can just replace the shaft. Take my Zerk fitting and put it back on. Tighten him up. Okay. Got my thrust washer on there. Put the nut back on. And now it's good to go. When I put it on the mower deck, then I'll pack both of them full of grease. I'll have grease that will come out of my weep hole. That'll tell me that it's fully packed with grease. And these spindles, by doing that, are going to last 10 times longer than replacing them with spindles that have those grease seals in them. So just something to keep in mind. It'll extend the life of your spindles, and it will keep you from wasting your time greasing something that's not going to get grease. Thanks for watching, folks. I appreciate you checking out my video. I hope that helps you extend the life of your mower spindles. Check out some of my other videos if you would. Give this one a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel. I hope to see you back real soon. Thank you, and God bless you.